What if the Jesus story you know has big holes? What if an old Bible kept safe for hundreds of years in Ethiopia's mountains has the missing parts of Jesus' life, the years from 12 to 30 that our regular Bible skips? But why were these stories taken out, and who wanted to hide them? Those of us who grew up with the Bible know how it goes. Jesus is born in Bethlehem, wise men visit, then he escapes to Egypt as a baby. Jump ahead and suddenly Jesus is 12, amazing teachers at Jerusalem's temple. Luke 2:41-52 tells this story clearly. But then something odd happens. The story goes quiet. We next see Jesus at about 30 years old, getting baptized by John. That's an 18-year gap, his whole growing up time completely gone from Scripture. Think about that. What happened during those years? Where did Jesus go? Who did he meet? What did he learn? These shape any person's life, yet for Christianity's main figure, they're blank. Many experts have ideas. Some think Jesus went to India, others say he studied with the Essenes, a Jewish group. But what if the answers were written down all along, kept safe in one of the world's oldest Christian places? What I'm sharing isn't some new dig discovery. It's been sitting in plain sight for centuries in Ethiopia's mountains, in one of the world's oldest Christian lands. The Ethiopian Bible, called the Ge'ez Bible, has 81 books compared to 66 in most Protestant Bibles, or 73 in Catholic ones. That's 15 extra books most Christians never read. But it's not just about having more books. This Bible has writings that describe Jesus' life during those missing years, writings that Western church leaders chose to leave out. Something else makes Ethiopia's Bible link special. Christianity didn't come there through European church workers. Ethiopian stories say Christianity arrived in the 1st century through the Ethiopian official mentioned in Acts 80:26-40, possibly making it one of the earliest Christian nations outside the Middle East. Ethiopia also stands out as the only African country that fought off European takeover, staying free while others fell under foreign control. This freedom let Ethiopia keep its religious ways without the outside pressure other places faced. When you look at this old Ethiopian Bible, bound in aged leather, with pages made from animal skin and written in Ge'ez, an ancient holy language, you're seeing perhaps the most true to original version of early Christian writings still around today. You might wonder how real the Ethiopian Bible tradition is. Is this just some strange offshoot with questionable texts? The Ethiopian Orthodox Church is among the oldest organized Christian groups in the world, set up in the 4th century. Older than many European Christian groups. In fact, while Europe was still mostly pagan, Ethiopia had already made Christianity its official religion under King Ezana in 330 AD. Ethiopia's link to Bible history goes even deeper. In 1 Kings 10, we read about the Queen of Sheba visiting King Solomon. What our Western Bibles don't mention is what happened after that visit. According to Ethiopian tradition, written in their ancient book called the Kebra Nagast, or Glory of Kings, the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon had a son named Menelik I, who became Ethiopia's first emperor. This isn't just religious folk talk. In 2012, genetic scientists from Cambridge University tested many Ethiopians' DNA and found signs that around 3,000 years ago, exactly when Solomon would have ruled, there was major genetic mixing between Ethiopian natives and Middle Eastern peoples. The Ethiopian royal family, until Emperor Haile Selassie, who ruled until 1974, claimed direct family ties from this union of Solomon and Sheba, making it history's longest-running kingdom with Bible figure connections. Even more fascinating, Ethiopian Christians believe they have the real Ark of the Covenant, the sacred chest holding the 10 Commandments. Their tradition says when Menelik visited his father Solomon in Jerusalem, he returned to Ethiopia with the Ark, which they claim still sits in a special holy place in the city of Aksum, watched by one monk who never leaves the grounds. To understand why certain books made it into our modern Bible while others didn't, we need to know how today's Bible came to be. In the early hundreds of years after Jesus, countless writings about his life and teachings spread. Some were from eyewitnesses, others from his followers, and many were later works mixing fact with legend. The first major push to standardize which texts counted as holy came at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. called by Emperor Constantine. Though many think this meeting finalized the Bible list, it actually just started the process of deciding which texts would count as scripture. Later church meetings and leaders continued this work, with Athanasius of Alexandria first listing the 27 New Testament books as we know them today in 367 AD. St. Jerome translated the Bible from Hebrew and Greek to Latin around 400 AD, creating what became known as the Vulgate. Here's what's key. These choices about which books to include were made by men, often with political and religious motives. Books that didn't match the growing official teaching were called questionable or false and left out. The King James Version, ordered in 1604 and finished in 1611, further set which texts most English-speaking Christians would consider official. King James I of England ordered this translation not just for religious reasons, but to unite his kingdom under one religious text that backed both the king's and church's power. The 47 scholars who worked on it were smart, but they had to follow specific rules from the king, including guidelines that supported church ranking and royal authority. They worked with texts already filtered through centuries of picking and choosing. Meanwhile, in Ethiopia, cut off by land features and politics, Christians kept a different set of writings, saving books that Western churches rejected or lost. So what exactly do these Ethiopian texts tell us about Jesus' missing years? The stories kept in books like the Ethiopian Book of the Contending of Christ and the Miracles of Jesus paint a rich picture of Jesus as a child and young man. According to these accounts, young Jesus wasn't just wise beyond his years. He was already working wonders from childhood. One famous story tells of Jesus playing with other children, shaping birds from clay. When the Sabbath ended, he ordered the clay birds to come alive, and they flew away, amazing everyone who saw. Another story describes how Jesus' earthly father Joseph was building a wooden bed for a rich man, but cut one board too short. Young Jesus told Joseph not to worry, then took the board and stretched it to the right length, saving his father from shame. These texts also describe Jesus healing hurt children, bringing dead animals back to life, and showing amazing knowledge of all scripture and spiritual matters that puzzled elders and teachers. There are stories of Jesus learning from the best teachers in various Jewish traditions, mastering not just the Torah, but also deeper mystical knowledge. Some accounts suggest he spent time with the Essenes, a Jewish group known for their simple lifestyle and focus on spiritual purity. These texts show Jesus as someone who, even as a child, knew his godly nature and purpose, yet was also learning to control and understand his powers within human limits. What's especially interesting is that many of these same stories appear in other ancient texts outside the Ethiopian tradition, like the Infancy Gospel of Thomas and the Arabic Infancy Gospel, suggesting they come from a common early tradition about Jesus that was widespread before being cut from the Western Bible. Not all stories in these Ethiopian texts show Jesus in ways we might expect. Some accounts describe a young Jesus still learning to control his godly powers, sometimes with troubling results. One disputed story tells of a time when another boy ran into Jesus, making him angry. Jesus said, "You shall not finish your journey," and right away the boy fell down dead. When local people complained to Joseph, Jesus allowed Joseph to pull his ear as punishment, but then brought the boy back to life, showing both his human feelings and godly power. Another account describes Jesus turning children who hid from him during a game into goats, only to change them back when their parents begged him. These stories present a young Jesus still bringing together his human emotions with his godly nature. Critics point to these more troubling stories as proof that these texts are later made-up tales, not matching Jesus' character as shown in the official Gospels. Defenders say they show Jesus' real human growth, learning to use his powers wisely as he grew up. It's important to note that even within Ethiopian tradition, these texts aren't all seen as equally holy. They're kept as part of the broader tradition. But Ethiopian scholars themselves make distinctions between different types of religious writings. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church groups its sacred writings into different levels of authority. The most trusted are the 81 books considered official. Others are respected as valuable for teaching, but not seen as godly inspired scripture in the same way. This careful approach to sacred texts is actually closer to how early Christians viewed religious writings before the strict official listing process of later centuries. Early Christians didn't have an in the Bible or not in the Bible view, but rather a range of texts with different levels of authority and usefulness. So why weren't these accounts of Jesus' childhood and youth included in the Bible most of us know? There are several strong reasons. First, many church fathers worried about texts that seemed to stress Jesus' godly nature at the cost of his human side. The teaching that grew in the 4th and 5th centuries emphasized that Jesus was fully human and fully divine, not a godly being just pretending to be human. Stories of Jesus doing amazing wonders as a child seemed to weaken his genuine human experience. Second, some of these stories disagreed with the Gospel of John, which states that Jesus' miracle at the wedding at Cana was his first miracle. If Jesus had been doing miracles since childhood, this statement would be false. Third, the growing church was fighting against various false teachings, especially Gnosticism, which stressed secret knowledge and spiritual insights. Texts that suggested Jesus had special hidden teachings or experiences that weren't widely known seemed to support these Gnostic ideas. Fourth, there were practical concerns about which texts could be proven real. Writings that couldn't be clearly traced to apostles or their close followers were viewed with doubt, especially if they appeared decades or centuries after the events they claimed to describe. Finally, there were political concerns. As Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, sameness of belief became important for keeping political unity. Texts that might inspire different interpretations or challenges to church authority were possibly destabilizing. It's worth noting that this process of selecting which texts to include wasn't a single plot or cover-up. It developed slowly over centuries, with different regional churches having different collections of texts until standardization slowly happened. Ethiopia's geographical isolation from these political pressures allowed it to keep a more diverse collection of texts, saving voices and traditions that were lost elsewhere. In recent decades, interest in these lost texts of Christianity has exploded, not just among scholars, but among everyday believers seeking a fuller understanding of their faith's history. The finding of the Nag Hammadi Library in Egypt in 1945 and the Dead Sea Scrolls between 1947 and 1956 revealed many early Christian and Jewish texts not included in the Bible, forcing scholars to rethink the variety of early Christianity. Modern translations have made Ethiopian texts more available to Western readers. Books like the Ethiopian Book of Life and scholarly works analyzing these traditions have brought these ancient stories to new audiences. Even mainstream churches have become more open to studying these texts, not necessarily as scripture, but as valuable windows into early Christian thought and practice. Many church schools now include courses on non-official texts alongside traditional Bible studies. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church itself has become more engaged with the wider Christian world after hundreds of years of relative isolation. Ethiopian Christians now share their traditions with global audiences through digital media, scholarly exchanges, and talks between different faiths. What's especially valuable about the Ethiopian tradition is that it wasn't rediscovered after being lost. It represents an unbroken tradition stretching back to the earliest centuries of Christianity. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has kept these texts and traditions continuously, providing a living link to ancient practices that scholars can study. The manuscript tradition itself is extraordinary. Ethiopia has some of the world's oldest decorated Christian manuscripts with unique art styles and symbol systems developed over centuries. The Garima Gospels, kept in Ethiopia's Abba Garima Monastery, have been carbon dated to between 330 and 650 AD, making them among the oldest complete Christian manuscripts in the world. So what do these Ethiopian texts and traditions ultimately tell us about Jesus, and do they change how we should understand him? These texts fill in the picture of Jesus as someone who grew and developed over time, who had a childhood and young adulthood, where he was both learning and teaching. They humanize Jesus while also showing how early Christians understood his unique nature. For those worried about religious implications, it's important to note that these texts don't go against core Christian teachings about Jesus' godly nature, death, and rising again. They add color and detail to parts of his life that the official Gospels leave blank. What's perhaps most valuable is how these texts remind us of Christianity's diverse beginnings. Today, we often think of Christianity as a Western religion that spread to Africa and Asia. But historically, Christianity developed at the same time in multiple regions with different stress points and traditions. Ethiopia, along with other ancient Christian communities like the Egyptian Coptic Church, the Syrian Orthodox Church, and the Church of the East in modern Iraq and Iran, represents a form of Christianity that grew independently of Roman and Greek influence. These diverse traditions remind us that there was never a single unified early Christianity, but rather multiple views and expressions of Jesus' life and teachings from the very start. For individual believers, engaging with these texts doesn't mean abandoning traditional scripture. Instead, they can provide enriching perspectives that complement familiar Bible accounts, offering new angles for reflection and spiritual growth. Whether you view these Ethiopian texts as godly inspired scripture, valuable historical documents, or simply interesting cultural artifacts, they undeniably widen our understanding of how early Christians viewed Jesus and how different communities kept their traditions about him. The story of the Ethiopian Bible is more than just a historical curiosity. It's a powerful reminder of how knowledge and wisdom can be kept safe against huge odds. Ethiopia's ancient Christian tradition survived attacks, including a devastating assault by Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi in the 1500s that destroyed many churches and manuscripts. It endured isolation, political upheavals, and pressures to modernize, yet kept its distinctive spiritual heritage. In 1938, a fire damaged the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Aksum, where many ancient manuscripts were kept, yet the most sacred texts were saved, continuing a tradition of preservation spanning centuries. During the Italian occupation in the 1930s and the communist Derg regime from 1974 to 1991, Ethiopian Christians went to amazing lengths to protect their sacred texts, sometimes hiding them in caves or buried containers. What this persistence tells us is that wisdom worth keeping will be kept, sometimes in the most unexpected places. While powerful empires and institutions have risen and fallen, this ancient African Christian tradition has quietly maintained its heritage, waiting for a time when the wider world would be ready to value it. Are you fascinated by these hidden stories from Christian history? If this journey through Ethiopia's ancient biblical tradition has opened your eyes to new possibilities about Jesus' life, don't miss our upcoming videos that will take you even deeper into forgotten wisdom and lost scriptures. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next exploration of biblical mysteries that mainstream churches rarely discuss. Our channel brings you the untold stories, suppressed texts, and alternative perspectives that have been preserved by ancient Christian communities around the world. And if you found this video eye-opening, please smash that like button and share it with friends and family who might be interested in discovering what's missing from their Bible. Your support helps us continue uncovering these hidden treasures of faith history. Comment below with what aspect of Jesus' missing years you found most surprising, or which ancient biblical tradition you'd like us to explore next. Join our growing community of truth seekers who aren't afraid to look beyond conventional religious teachings to discover the full richness of early Christianity. Subscribe now. Your spiritual journey is just beginning.